Good morning and welcome to the strategy development using a volume profile stream. It is Thursday the 2nd of March. So straight into it this morning, some of the market moving fundamentals from both yesterday and overnight. Obviously we had Francois Fillon come out and with a little bit of rumors going around, there was talk he might resign and step down, and his next in line in his party, Mr. Juppé, was supposedly going to take over, but he has since come out and squashed those rumors. He has said he will continue to fight against this idea of, the political system going up against him and forcing him out. So the important thing to pay attention to is, how the market's responding to this. And it's very clear that, since Fillon's problems have increased over the last couple of sessions, we've seen sort of support, or at least, the odds of a Macron victory increase slightly, with Le Pen's odds steadily moving in the opposite direction. So net to net, a little bit of a risk-on type ultimate result. So just keep an eye on that as we go forward, as the French election becomes more relevant in the weeks ahead. Then secondly, overnight, late last night in GMT time, obviously the House of Lords in the UK has effectively defied Theresa May, and they've come out and they said that they're not willing to approve the bill as is, and they want the Prime Minister to come out and agree to keep EU nationals' rights to stay in the UK, and actually before she goes to Europe to begin negotiations, she actually comes out and tells EU nationals exactly what their fate is. So very interesting that the House of Lords has gone up against the Prime Minister. What happens now in essence is obviously it goes back to the Parliament. The MPs have to vote again on something potentially. So just keep an eye on this, because we're going to see a little bit of backlash from the Prime Minister, simply because she has said she wants to be able to have a fresh slate when she begins negotiations, and not give anything up going into those negotiations beforehand. So very interesting. We have seen the House of Lords go up against Theresa May. Now, what's more important is what has the impact been on the market? And if we look purely at the sterling's performance overnight, nothing significant. It is up, it's green across the board, but nothing majorly, nothing that we would look at and say, okay, well, this is net and net very positive for pound. So just keep an eye that obviously over the course of the day this may change, and we might find that some participants feel that this is very positive, or equally very negative, but net and net nothing major has moved as a result of this. So keep an eye on that as we go through the course of the day. In terms of any any major overnight flows, as we can see, obviously the All Ordinaries, the Australian index, playing catch up to the E-mini S&Ps, up 1.26%. That's just simply as a result of obviously we saw a very aggressive move, 1.5% move in the E-mini S&Ps, the Dow and the Nasdaq yesterday. As for the Hang Seng, up 0.43, and very interestingly, the Shanghai is down 0.52. Now, it's very important to see when one of these indices does buck the trend, try and interpret why it's bucking the trend, what's creating that sort of opposite type flow. So just make sure you are aware of that going into today. Other than that, obviously the traditional risk-off markets, the yen, the gold, the US 10-year, as we can see, relatively stable, nothing majorly market moving. So net and net, we've come in this morning and a relatively balanced, steady open. In terms of the economic data calendar today, relatively light. We've got two sort of news events as well as an auction out of the French. But the key highlight for today is the European inflation data. This is front and center simply because there is this idea now that the ECB is going to have to sort of start tapering down a little bit quicker if inflation does pick up more aggressively than they're anticipating. Obviously the central bank has told us that they are not moving anytime soon, and they're not likely to change path until later in the year, or at least give us more information later in the year. So it's key to know that obviously if we do get sort of spikes up in inflation today, again, it's going to create this sort of idea or feeling in the market that maybe the central bank is a little bit behind, and there might be some sort of concern of a potential earlier taper. So the key inflation number to look at is obviously the core inflation. ECB's drug is told tell us numerous times that the headline number is not important because of the base effects. So keep an eye on the core inflation. Expected is 0.9. We can see that we haven't had inflation above 1% core since 2013, 2014. So do keep an eye on that. If the number comes out hot, above 1%, above 1.1, 1.2, that could be massive opportunity for the markets very early on in the trading session. So today what we're going to talk about in terms of strategy, we're going to look at two strategies. One is a trend strategy. It's day 2 trend. In other words, how do we trade a market the day after a trend day? And we're going to look at that in the Euro stocks. And then what we're also going to do is we're actually going to go and look at a momentum strategy, being the open drive. We're going to backdate this a little bit, have a look at the open drive that we had in the Euro stocks yesterday. So let's get into our charts and have a look. So what you can see in front of you is the Euro Stoxx 50. Now, what we want to pay attention to first is the open drive that we had yesterday, some of the elements of the open drive, the characteristics of it, but also the execution style and how we could have potentially gotten involved in an open drive strategy. So first thing to note is obviously the gap up. We can see the market closed down around the sort of 33.15 area. We had a gap on the open, so the market opened up 33.29, failed to fill the gap, and we saw quite an aggressive move already in the initial balance. So, before the cash markets opened, we can see the initiative, we can see the intent. More importantly, we can see the failure to fill the gap. Now, usually gaps do get filled relatively early in a session, but once that cash market comes in, if they fail to fill in that gap, that's the early identifier, that's the early characteristic we want to pay attention to. So we can see that as the cash market opened, straight away the initiative came from the cash session, and we took out the previous or the high made in the initial hour of trade. Now, the important aspect with an open drive is not necessarily to always, get on to, this very aggressive up move. That's not, necessarily the play, because that could be, could have its own sense of danger, in a sense that we have opened out of balance. We've opened well away from the previous day's close, so we could well have seen a lot of sideways trade before a continuation. So the key to an open drive is not necessarily the initiative move, not necessarily getting on that M print, but once that N print left the single prints and failed to fill in down below, we then have our opportunity to get long with a predefined risk. So that's the key to the open drive, is to get long once the market has told you actually there's quite an aggressive bid in the market, quite an aggressive buy side response. So once we see that, we look for the opportunity to get long on a pullback. And note how that that pullback actually coincided with a weekly high from last week. So we can see the market came back, gave us a technically strong entry point, left some single prints, and in the same time frame took out the previous high. So there was real good characteristics, real good sort of objective clues coming from the market. So we didn't have to second guess ourselves too much. We can see obviously the market then continued to rotate up nicely and subsequently had an extremely strong day for the rest of the period. So obviously we just focused more importantly on that initial drive, on that little bit of continuation, maybe up towards this sort of 65 to 68 areas. Once that's done, whatever happens, but the important thing to do is to get onto that open drive once it gives you those early clues, and most important, the pullback. So now we've discussed the open drive, let's talk about day 2 trend. How do we respond the day after trend? How do we trade the day after a trend? Now, the key element to understand is, what two types of strategies you're going to employ on a day 2 trend. Now, the first type of strategy is obviously what happens at the previous day's extreme. Now, very early on the day after a trend, the market does like to test the previous day's extreme in terms of the trend. So that's our very early clue. Can the market hold prices above the previous day's extreme point? If it does, okay, we could potentially see further trend. If it fails, that's when we want to be switched on to a distribution or a balanced type trade day. So what we can see is obviously the Euro Stoxx 50 has opened up. It's sort of not necessarily failed, but it hasn't really tested the previous day's extreme yet. It has sort of stopped out at the previous day's value area high, and it's since drifted a little bit lower into the previous day's value area. So what we're looking to do if this market does decide to balance is play for the balance trade, look for the two-way trade, look to sell the higher prices and look to buy the lower prices, and effectively just partake in a balanced day type. Now, some of the key areas you want to look at, obviously, our line in the sand, we should get nowhere near this 33.54. If that goes, we could be in for a very aggressive reversal in the Eurostoxx 50. So what we're looking for is some initial support to come in and around this low value area, 33.79, 33.80. We try the longs there, look for the balance in the distribution, and again, watch how the market responds at some of these key areas. If that gets taken out, well, we try a long again at 33.65. It is our value area low from yesterday, and also a relatively high volume node. So keep an eye on those two key areas. Look how the market responds there. Remember, we are still technically not just sort of medium term, but we're also very strongly bullish to the upside, so long as our initial areas of support hold. If they go, the market turns a little more neutral, and you need to become a little more neutral as well. Again, note in these balance days, be very careful being too aggressive, be very careful assuming trend will continue to the upside. Rather look for positional plays, look to trade from the low side, buy from the lower prices and sell from the higher prices, and play the distribution. Of course, if we take out yesterday's high, by all means, look at the volatility, look at the volume. If the buyers become interested, more aggressive, look for the buy side opportunity through yesterday's high and see how the market responds. Okay, that's our two strategies for today. Obviously, we will come back to those a little bit later on in the session when we do the debrief this afternoon. As for the rest of the day going forward, as you can see, this afternoon at 5 o'clock, you've got me again for the afternoon debrief. We're going to have a look at some price ladder analysis, as well as how these two strategies, or at least the day 2 trend, played out in the Eurostoxx 50. We'll analyze that, analyze the execution style, and how we could have entered and executed that. Then, if you have any, or you want any information, obviously you can log on to axiafutures.com or email info@axiafutures.com. Otherwise, follow us on Twitter at Axia Futures. So to finish off, there is no elevator to success. You have to take the stairs. It's slow steps, guys. It's all about progress, little steps. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither will your trading career. So make small progress today, and we'll catch up again later.